Woohoo! I think we are live. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us for today's important session on employee versus independent contractor, reducing personal service business risk. So my name is Andrew Wall. I'm going to be a host of today's session. For those of you who aren't familiar with myself and our organization, I'm the managing partner here at CPA4IT. We're an accounting firm that's been specializing in independent contractors since 1984, when my father, George Wall, founded the firm. Over the years, we have had a number of accomplishments, including being recognized as the top 50 cloud accountants in North America multiple times, being recognized as one of the top 100 accounting influencers, being recognized as the firm of the future by Intuit. And in addition to that, as I said, we have been working in this industry since 1984, which was before the first landmark precedent-setting case around personal service business risk, which happened really in 1986 with the Weeby Door case, which we'll be talking about today. And over the years, we've had the good fortune of working with the National Association of Computer Consulting Businesses, who have been big advocates for the rights of independent contractors, going to bat with them with the CRA, as well as the local, provincial, and federal governments to get some of the changes that we've seen with Bill 88, which we'll also be talking about today. As I said, we've been doing this since 1984, so we have lots of years of experience around this issue, around employees versus independent contractors. Unfortunately, it's one of those issues that seems to ebb and flow over time. It sort of seems that what happens is that someone in CRA gets this great idea that there's this windfall of independent contractors that we could assess as being personal service businesses, and there's all this money sitting there, and they go out and people like ourselves and the National Association of Computer Consulting Businesses fight for your rights, win many, many cases, and CRA drops it for a period of time. And then I guess someone new comes in and sees the light of this and goes after it again. Now, there was a report that there was supposed to be a special project initiated in July of this year. If that went to fruition, we ourselves didn't see one case out of it, which is the good news. But unfortunately, it doesn't mean the issue has gone away. But I guess we need to start by defining what the issue is and what personal service business risk is. Sometimes referred to as personal service corporation risk. So PSB, PSC are sometimes used interchangeably. And this comes down to a definition in the Income Tax Act under Section 125, paragraph 7, which defines personal service businesses. And we've got the entire definition here. The key factors we've highlighted here is that an employee would be reasonably regarded as an officer or employee, but for the existence of a corporation. That but for became very important language that was used in many court cases to assess independent contractors. Now, to give you guys a bit of knowledge around personal service business risk, and to give you maybe to start with a bit of an analogy. And the analogy that I use around personal service business risk is a shark attack. And the reason I use a shark attack is because if you are ever bitten by a shark, it is life-altering, it is vicious, it is bloody. So too can a personal service business risk assessment be for your business. It can be life-altering, it can take a huge amount of time and effort to deal with, it can be extremely costly and devastating to you. However, much like a shark attack, they don't actually happen all that often. Audits in general are less than 1% of the population, and PSB audits themselves are an even smaller percentage. So we're really talking basis points of the entire businesses in Canada being assessed as a personal service business. But it doesn't mean that that risk is non-existent, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't address it. Just like we shouldn't be going diving off the coast of South Africa in a meat suit, we want to make sure that we're putting the layers of protection in place where we can. So putting those shark cages together, wrapping ourselves in as much protection so that if a great white comes swimming through the waters, we know that we're safely swimming in our confined area and that we can continue to enjoy the beautiful world that is the ocean. So, well, it is a big risk. I think there are lots of ways that you can go around protecting yourself from this risk that is personal service business risk. I want to start with a couple of case studies to help you understand where PSB came from, and what the implications and how it ultimately can impact your business. So first, I want to start with the Weeby door case, because this was the landmark precedent-setting case that happened in 1986. Now, this was a door company. It was not an independent contractor in the traditional sense of, say, an IT consultant or a management consultant or an engineer or anything along those lines. This was a door installation company with independent contractors who were installing the doors. Prior to this, in the IT industry, most of it was in-house IT services, and it wasn't a lot of independent contractors. But in 1986, we set out the 4 criteria that are still ultimately used today for assessing whether you are a personal service business. And that includes the degree of supervision and control, ownership of tools, risk of profit or loss, and whether you're an integral part of the business. Now, in addition to these 4 criteria, basically what the judge said in that case is that it's not that each of these cases needs to be judged on its own merits, and it's not any one of these individual tests that's going to rule you to be an independent contractor or an employee. It is the sum of the parts. So this sort of gave us the criteria and the tools to defend independent contractors, but what it ultimately meant is that there was still a lot of risk that you could be assessed as an independent or as a personal service business, and that you would have to know and understand the issues around personal service business to adequately defend your rights to work as an independent contractor. Now, bump along a few more years and get a little bit closer to the present, and we have the Sagaz case. And the Sagaz case is an important case to talk about, because in this situation, it wasn't just an independent contractor going direct to the door installation company. There was a third party in the mix, someone who was placing the independent contractors. And so the Sagaz case reinforced the 4 tests that are still used today, and said those are still the factors, but it basically eliminated the benefit of having a third party like a placement agency, which for a period of time, you simply had that in place. If you were going through a placement agency, you effectively couldn't be deemed to be an independent contractor. The Sagaz case, well, still in this case, the individual was determined to be an independent contractor as opposed to an employee or a personal service business. The whole relationship was taken into context. So it basically said, just because there's a third party in the middle doesn't mean that the issue is irrelevant. You still have to look at these 4 tests to determine whether the contractor is truly an independent contractor or if they could be reasonably regarded to be an employee of the business. Now, another thing to know and understand when it comes to personal service business risk is personal service business risk is something that is specific to a corporation. But if you're going and working as a sole proprietor, it doesn't mean that you have no risk at all. It's just a different classification. You're not a personal service business. You're just deemed to be an employee. You still lose all the benefits of being able to deduct expenses that you have as being a sole proprietor, and you're effectively deemed to be an employee. With a corporation, it is a little bit more complex because you're still an incorporated entity, but you're now this special class of entity called a personal service business. And with this personal service business, you lose a lot of the benefits of that a corporation brings. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get a little deeper into this session. But before that, I want to talk about a few other cases that are pretty notable. And one of them is the Gomez case. And this was an independent contractor. And I love this case because the end client in this situation was CRA themselves. And what's interesting to note is that CRA is actually one of the largest employers of independent contractors in the country, because they place a lot of people and they place a lot of people on contract. Now, unfortunately, Gomez lost his case, and it was really around factors of control and integration. And we'll talk a little bit more about ways that you can mitigate and protect against each of the 4 tests that we go through. But I think the real reason that Gomez lost his case is because he became a Google lawyer and decided to represent himself. And the important thing to note about this is that you never want to be representing yourself in a case that can have such a significant impact on your finances and on your life. And knowing and understanding the language around personal service business is really important, because it's very, very easy to say something that implies control or integration without realizing it. And the example I always give is if you were asked by a CRA agent whether you abide by the policies and procedures of your employer, you might simply answer yes, not realizing that that's got implications around control and integration. Whereas if you reframed your answer to be like, no, I don't. I have my own policies and procedures for my own entity that mirror those of my end clients so that I can be an effective independent contractor. You can see how that subtle difference makes a really important distinction when we talk about control and integration, which are the big areas where CRA is likely to catch you. Because these are the areas that are a little bit more subject to interpretation and aren't as black and white as your contract. Now, another case I like to talk about is the Clinton-Hamilton case. And the reason I like to talk about the Clinton-Hamilton case is because this was a part of the last special project that CRA did, which goes back 3 or 4 years now, maybe 4 or 5 years at this point. And CRA went out and, someone in their midst thought there was this big opportunity, and they reassessed hundreds of independent contractors. And along with this, they sent out a survey, and based on how people answered and responded to that survey, they were assessed. And a lot of people, unfortunately, tried to answer those surveys themselves, despite us putting out sample responses and questionnaires and working with a number of people in the industry to try and educate the community on what was going on. Ultimately, a lot of people were assessed as personal service businesses. But the NACCB, the National Association of Computer Consulting Business, saw this for the risk that it was and were worried that there was going to be this, landmark business precedent that could be set by all these cases that CRA could potentially win. So they set up a special fund to hire their own lawyers and help defend a group of about 220 independent contractors. And we won every single one of those cases, which is the great news. Unfortunately, all of them were what they call a consent to judgment, which means they didn't go to court. So you can't go to the Tax Court of Canada's website and download this court case. It is a public record, but it's not an easily locatable public record. And so it's not something that a lot of other accounting firms might even be aware of, that there was all these hundreds of cases that were won thanks to the support of the NACCB and all the agencies that work therein, as well as ourselves, who helped to participate in as much as we could defend the rights of these independent contractors. But that was the last special project that took place. As I said, there was announced a special project that was to begin in July of this year. To be honest, we haven't done a lot of personal service business risk webinars throughout the course of this year, because thankfully the cases haven't been rolling out. I guess CRA is still busy with dealing with issues around, CERB benefits and other COVID benefits that rolled out. And thankfully, it has not been the focus of their attention, at least that I have personally seen. If anyone else has any other news, or you're seeing anyone who has been assessed as a personal service business, we strongly encourage you to reach out and connect with us, because we want to help and defend the rights of independent contractors, whether they're a client of ours or not. So it does look like we have our very first question coming in, so bear with me a second as I'll try to look that. So thank you, Dimitri. So he says, I'm interested in your accounting services. Do you offer receipt management and matching in your monthly bookkeeping packages? So it is, yes, there is an option for a receipt management tool that we can work with, which is Dext. Unfortunately, we no longer include that in the base price package, but there is, for a small additional fee, we leverage Receipt Bank. and that allows us to sync your receipts with your bookkeeping software, QuickBooks Online or Xero, whatever the case might be. And this is a bit of a side, and I do encourage everyone to go back and check past webinars that we have on Receipt Bank and our bookkeeping. But documentation is a really important factor, and it is important when we talk about personal service business risk as well. So with that, I am going to sort of move on here, if that's okay with you guys, and continue on with sort of the key factors in determination of whether you are a personal service business, and ways you can go about minimizing this risk. So we've got 4 tests that are still used today. So control over work, ownership of tools, opportunity for profit or loss, and the integration test. I'm going to start with probably the most important, which is control over work. Now, this doesn't mean that your employer can't have any control. It's just that they need to ensure that the contractor has the freedom to determine how the work is done. So you don't dictate the actual methods or the process that the contractor should use, but you certainly can control what the outcome or the expected outcome is supposed to be. And again, having things in here like having flexibility at work hours, making sure that the contract shows that there's non-exclusive working relationship. Project-based work is great for demonstrating a lack of control over work. And we want to sort of avoid that direct supervision of the contractor's work, and instead focus on just managing their day-to-day activities and managing the outcomes or the end results of their work. Again, this sort of relates to tools, but, having your own tools and equipment is helpful. We're going to talk about that in just a second, because there are some changes with that. Back in Weeby Doors case, what we were talking about is like physical tools for installing a door into a house. When you're an independent contractor and you're going to work in a bank, it's very, very different. So when we're talking about ownership of tools here, what we've been able to successfully defend is that the tools that you bring to the job is your knowledge and your experience and your certifications and those types of things. And there was, in fact, a special CPP bulletin issued almost 10 years ago now, that was the first sort of indication that CRA acknowledged that as an independent contractor, your keyboard and your computer is no longer the tools, and that in a environment where we're worried about security and confidentiality, that bringing your own device into a major bank is just not even an option. So thankfully, ownership of tools is still one of the tests that is performed when they assess whether you are a personal service business risk or a personal service business I don't know, I can't figure out my words today. A personal service business. It's not a highly it's not used often in the determination of you being a employee or a personal service business or an independent contractor. So we've got another question here that's come up. It's actually a response from my colleague. We have a variety of bookkeeping and accounting packages to suit your individual needs, but yes, we do offer a package that includes a receipt management and matching monthly bookkeeping, which is our Pro package. Please see the link below, which gives the full details of the Pro package, and the link is cpa4it.ca/corporate-tax-pricing. Thank you, Rachel, for doing that. And we will continue on for opportunity for profit or risk of loss. And again, having multiple contracts is a good way to minimize the risk here. But in this day and age, that's not always viable. And in fact, we have many cases that we can cite where an independent contractor has been with the same client for decades, or at least a decade or more. We've got 12, 15 years with the same end client, and they were still deemed to be an independent contractor, not a personal service business. But it does demonstrate that there is a risk for profit or loss. Also, other things that help with risk for profit or loss, which my favorite thing is insurance, because by definition, if you have insurance like errors and omissions and liability insurance, you are insuring against a risk. So you wouldn't have insurance if there wasn't a risk for profit or loss. And so again, this is another area where we have been very successful in being able to demonstrate that our clients are truly independent contractors and that they do have a risk for profit or loss. Now, the integration test, again, so we're sort of bookended here by the two bigger factors when it comes to where CRA might trip you up and assess you as a personal service business. And for integration here, the key is going to be clearly defining the scope of work. So the contract, and here the contract is really going to be black and white, and it should clearly define the work to be performed by a contractor and emphasize that it's project-based work rather than a core function of the business. Of course, you do want to sort of maintain separation in branding and representation. And so what we always say is look and act like a business to be treated like a business. One of the big things that you could do wrong is on social media, on LinkedIn, saying you are an employee at X, Y, and Z, as opposed to I'm an independent contractor. My company is ABC Limited, and I am on contract at X, Y, and Z. So maintaining that separation in branding and in representation, particularly online, because if you don't think CRA is going to check your social media presence, you are mistaken. And you should have really your own distinct sort of business processes. So you have, a different way that your employees interact. And we got another message here from one of our partners. So having errors and omissions liability insurance helps with keeping corp status. Are there other types of other insurance that can help do the same, i.e. disability insurance? I guess all of this, disability insurance, great example, Sam. Again, there's a risk for profit or loss. If you were disabled, you could no longer generate income. Yes, there are. And, to point out our partners here, IT360 and LMS ProLink as our partners who can provide all these amazing insurance protection to help mitigate your risk. I want to point those guys out as well. So where was I? I was talking about integration. So again, if you can have other clients, that's great. You want to avoid integration into the company's hierarchy. Again, most of the time, you're not going to be hired as the VP as an independent contractor, but you want to make sure that how you're represented in the corporation and on org charts and stuff like that is as an independent contractor. And you want to make sure that you're documenting the relationship as best you can and having a contract that truly supports your status as an independent contractor. Sorry about that, guys. My phone's going off here. I also want to take a minute. This is somewhat of a bit of an aside from personal service business risk, but it is somewhat related. So there were some recent changes in Ontario in the Employment Standards Act, which was a big part of our work at the NACCB. I'm actually a registered provincial lobbyist. I worked to help lobby the government for Bill 88, which we think is a really important thing. And Bill 88, what it specifically did is changes to the Employment Standards Act to include certain type of businesses, specifically IT consultants, from the Employment Standards Act. The reason that this was important is it was actually a danger to effectively dismantling the entire model of independent contractors. Because what was happening is you had independent contractors who had gone out and acted as independent contractors, filed tax returns as independent contractors, and then gone in as part of a class action suit to say that they were entitled to all their rights under the Employment Standards Act as an employee. This is extremely dangerous for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it's going to erode demand from clients to place independent contractors, because if they're going to give you all the benefits of being an employee, and pay you more as an independent contractor, why would they do that? And if you've got greater risk over here with independent contractors, it's going to deter the agencies from working with independent contractors. And for those of you who are on the call, I'm sure you're aware of all the benefits of being an independent contractor. You know, the ability to deduct expenses, the ability to leave money inside your corporation, you know, all the amazing benefits that we talk about in all the different webinars. And so in our lobbying efforts, CRA sort of came back and said, yes, we understand that there is, you know, an issue here. We want to set, you know, a bit of a line in the sand. And so they did set an hourly rate. You had to be above a certain hourly rate to be effectively excluded from the Employment Standards Act, which is why many of you might see that agencies right now, if you're below a certain hourly rate, they just won't place you as an independent contractor. They might place you as a temp employee, but not as an independent contractor. And that's because the risk still exists there. And while others might, there are some agencies that are willing to take that risk. Effectively, they're going to want a higher margin because they're taking on more risk, which effectively means that's coming from somewhere. So either your end client is going to have to pay more, or you're going to have to take less, or some sort of hybrid in the middle. So we consider Bill 88 to be a big win and help sheltering and protecting the industry. And again, it's part of our battle in protecting the independent contractors' rights, as much as we've done over here around personal service business. Now, what we haven't talked about yet is we've alluded a little bit to how devastating, you know, the shark attack that is a personal service business risk assessment could be. But maybe we need to talk about specifically what's going to happen. So you're going to have increased tax liability. So you're going to lose the small business deduction, leading to a higher corporate tax rate that is almost triple the tax rate that you pay with the small business rate of only 12.2% here in Ontario. In addition, you're not going to have the same ability to claim all of the business expenses and deductions that are available to other corporations. So there's going to be restrictions on deducting common business expenses like advertising, meals and entertainment, and only a limited range of expenses like salary. The other thing that's a big one that, again, Sam would want me to mention is the IPPs. Those are still going to be safe, and that's a way to shelter and protect those things as well. In addition, you're going to lose the HST input tax credits. So if you are using the long method of HST, which actually most of our independent contractors would probably be on the quick method, but if you were on the long, you're now going to lose the ability to deduct input tax credits on those business expenses. There could be salary and payroll implications. So you need to draw the income primarily through salary rather than dividends, because again, the income, if it came out of dividends, came out of money that's already been taxed at the corporate tax rate, and your tax rate for the corporation is much higher now. And of course, you're going to be looking at reassessments and penalties, because they're not going to look at 1 year. They're going to look at 2-3 years typically, and they're going to reassess a multitude of years. So typically in a PSB assessment, you're looking at minimum tens of thousands of dollars and sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's not even taking into account the legal and compliance costs that you would have for hiring a lawyer to defend against this, or an accounting firm. Now, to understand your rights, you do have 3 levels of appeals within CRA, which your accountant can represent you. And we've got a very good track record here, and we're going to talk a little bit more in a second about what we do to protect your rights and to protect our clients. But beyond that, you now got to go to the Tax Court of Canada, and then Federal Court of Appeals, and then Supreme Court of Canada. And in those court cases, we are not lawyers. You would need an actual lawyer to defend you. But it does look like we've got a couple more questions that have come through. So someone asked, what's the threshold rate you mentioned for Bill 88? It's $50 an hour. So I hope that helps answer that question. That's a super simple one. And then if a client has a part-time contract, say 20 hours per week, while having a full-time employment, would he or she be considered an employee or a contractor? So again, just because she has another full-time job doesn't mean that she's either one or the other. we again have to go through all these four tests to look at that the specific role that she's doing part-time. Does it still meet all the criteria? Odds are you're not going to have that issue around integration test. What are we doing to minimize the issue around risk for profit or loss and control? We still have to look at those other factors. But I would say the probability is decreased because you're at least passing the integration test. So hopefully that helps. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the implications. So now maybe we can talk a little bit about the best practices and things that you can do to minimize your risk of being deemed a personal service business. So first and foremost is a strong, clear, and correctly written contract. That does not mean using ChatGPT to write your contract for you. It does mean using a contract that has been vetted by both lawyers and accountants. Lawyers are great looking at this from a legal standpoint, but they may not be looking at it from a tax standpoint. So strongly encourage you to have both look at your contract. If you are going through a third-party agency, one of the big benefits that a third party like a staffing agency brings is that they do have contracts that have been vetted and tested by accountants and lawyers. And in fact, the NACCB even has a sample contract that they have available on their website. And of course, if you need a contract to be reviewed, we do offer that as a service. Of course, you want to make sure that the work relationship conduct must support the contract. And this is what we're talking about here, is not putting your foot in your mouth and not saying something about how your work contact supports the contract, because that is where CRA catches most people, is in language and wording that to you might seem innocent and innocuous, but is actually designed specifically to catch you and trip you up and deem you to have control or integration issues. Limiting the contract length is definitely a big thing that we strongly encourage. Ideally, what we want is a contract that has limited contract length with no specific language that exerts control, but simply says if they're unhappy with the process for whatever reason, either side can terminate the contract quickly and easily. And again, you'll see with a lot of the major banks, not only will they limit contract length, after 2 years, they will likely ask that you take a minimum of a 1 month or 2 month sabbatical in between contracts. And again, this is again to help you as well as them, because they, as much as it can be bad for you, it can be bad for them if you're deemed to be an employee rather than an independent contractor, because there's issues around CPP and EI and a whole bunch of other issues that come up for them. So diversifying your client base, again, this is a nice to have, and we'd love to see it when you can diversify your client base and have multiple clients. But again, if 90% of your work is done by one contractor or one client, there is still independence issues there. But to the extent that you can have other contracts, it definitely does help, and we do encourage it. But again, we have been able to support and win cases where people have been with one client for many, many, many years, and we've still been able to have them deemed to be an independent contractor. Because as I said earlier, the courts have always said it's not any one of these in isolation that can determine you to be either an employee or a personal service business. It's the sum of the whole. We also recommend implementing asset protection strategies. We love things like IPPs because those are sheltered and protected. We love things like holding companies so that if anything were to ever happen to this company, there's basically no assets in it. We do love the idea of getting liability insurance, which we've talked about. And we also want to make sure that you're controlling your work process. Allow your clients to control the outcome, but you should have a process for how you conduct your work. And to the extent that you have that documented, and this is the process that I follow for the projects that I take on, that is ammunition. And really what I want you to think about when we talk about protecting yourself around personal service business is about putting multiple layers of protection, right? We want to have Kevlar, a steel plate, bulletproof glass. We want to create as many layers of protection as we possibly can to minimize this risk. And that also includes building an online professional profile that supports you, an independent contractor. It's so easy to create a website. There's now AI that can build you a website in all of about 3 minutes. Having a social media profile that says you're an independent contractor, highlights the different projects that you work on, shows your capabilities. Again, we want to see that. We do also strongly encourage you to use a proper legal business name as opposed to a numbered company. We believe that businesses do business with other businesses, not with numbered companies. Those are used for holding companies, not for independent contractors. Now, again, there's not nearly any court case evidence to support this, but again, we do strongly encourage you to use a business name rather than a numbered company, which is why all of our incorporation packages include the cost of the name search that go along with it. And then lastly, and arguably most importantly, hire an experienced professional to represent you if you are assessed to be a personal service business. We go back to that Gomez case, which is a perfect example of what not to do. I know that, it's so easy to look things up on Google and to come to webinars like this and feel like you're an expert. But there's a lot more than what we've covered today. We're doing our best to be as succinct as we can and cover as much as we can in a short period of time. But we've been doing this, like I said, since 1984. We have decades of experience. We have seen hundreds of cases, and we have some specific things that we do to protect our clients. And those include, but aren't limited to, our unique audit representation protection. So all of our packages right now include audit representation protection, which means if you are audited, we'll represent you up until the third and final stages of appeals. As I've said, our track record on that is very, very, very good. And we have not lost a major case since I've been here. And that's largely because of all the work that we've done leading up to this, including our proprietary 76-page response to CRA personal service business attacks. And what this is it goes through every case that we have seen in Tax Court of Canada, Federal Court of Appeals, and Supreme Court of Canada, and outlines why independent contractors are independent contractors, and then we correlate that to our individual client's case. And we slap that on the desk of the auditor, and most of them don't want to leaf through 76 pages. So a lot of the cases get dropped before the agent even reads that. For those of them that read it, they know and understand that we know and understand what we're talking about, and that we're going to fight for our rights for our independent contractors and ensure that they are not assessed as personal service businesses. We also have done things like sample responses to CRA questionnaires. We used to even have an assessment on our website where you could go and you could put in your business and do an assessment. If it comes to that, we can certainly happy to do that for a price, but no longer offer that for free anymore. If you are worried that you are a personal service business. Again, another question here: do we have a document that describes the 76-pager? I don't think we do, but it's a great idea. So Rachel, if you're listening, maybe that's something we should work on, and putting something on our website that tells a little bit more about what that document is. But again, what I really want to highlight here is that we are a resource to help and assist anyone who is fighting the independent contractor battle, because our livelihood depends on this industry continuing to thrive. It is very unique. It doesn't happen as much in the US because of some of the lack of tax benefits that we have up here in Canada. And so we really want to make sure that we're protecting this industry. Rachel says, so Sam, you try to give me more work, but she's on it. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. And with that, I do want to open it up for some more Q&A and let you know if you do have any more questions, how you can reach out to our organization. We do offer webinars that we put on every 2 weeks. We also have our new podcast, Friday AI, where we talk all about AI and all the magical tools that are around us today. Next one's not till the new year, as we'll be taking a break over the holidays. But our phone number is 1-800-465-7532. You can reach us during office hours or reach out to our customer service team at customerservice@cpa4it.ca. And I'll give you guys a few minutes to see if there's any other questions that we've got. Otherwise, I will thank everyone for their time and give you a few minutes back in your schedule. And happy holidays, everyone, is the first message that comes through. So yes, wishing everyone a happy holidays and a couple thank yous. You're more than welcome. I'm glad you guys found it useful. Again, we're here to support you in any way we can. And I wish you a happy holidays and a fruitful new year. Bye for now, everybody.